Thanks everyone for joining us for this video in regards to a tornado webinar. And when I first talked with Alisa about this, it's like, I can't believe that happened. But I thought it'd be very interesting for two of the panelists that were on this webinar, got interrupted by a tornado on March 25th, kind of explain how that works. Life is fragile, and apparently webinars are as well. So Paul Sighinolfi and Alisa Hofmann were two of the four panelists, and I'd like for y'all to briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll kind of dive into what weirdness happened during that 60-minute space. So Paul, start us off.
I'm Paul Sighinolfi. I'm a senior director at Ametros. We're a company that does Medicare set-asides, and that's what I was speaking about on the 25th.
Yeah, Medicare set-asides usually aren't that dramatic or entertaining. So, Alisa?
Yes, Alisa Hofmann. I work for Arcadia Settlements Group. I am the Director of Workers' Compensation and Medicare Practices, and we were doing a webinar with Melissa Zwilling, Paul Sighinolfi, myself, and Carlisle Medical. And at the time, it was a little overwhelming what was happening.
Yeah, and Melissa was housed in Birmingham. That was when the storms were coming through the southeast, and the timing was such that her house was peppered with trees, and her neighborhood around her was largely destroyed by tornadoes that came through in the midst of the webinar. So Paul, Alisa, why don't you go ahead and start, because I think you were kind of the one who was supposed to be the moderator that Melissa was trying to hand it off to.
Yes, that's true.
Work out all that well. So
yeah, unfortunately, the handoff didn't work out as well as we had thought. So Melissa was actually moderating the PowerPoint from Birmingham, and I was in Denver, Colorado at the time. And she mentioned that there were some storms coming through, and she was concerned about tornadoes, because there was some discussion about there could be some tornadoes that touched down. So we talked about that at the very beginning, and we only had a couple minutes. And she said, I'll hand it off to one of you guys as, to take over the presentation if something should happen and I actually have to leave the webinar. Well, as she handed it off, I'm not sure if the actual power went out or what had happened, but to moderate the PowerPoint were not fully turned over. So it immediately kicked me off the webinar, and I actually had to sign back in. And I don't know if it kind of got stuck in the mode somewhere between, Melissa and myself, because then it just got stuck. And when I got back on, I wasn't able to pull the PowerPoint back up and to display it. So everybody was looking at my blue screen, which was unfortunate. The good news was that we had gotten through 3/4 of the CE program when this happened. And poor Paul, I feel like Paul saved the day by being able to walk through his portion of the webinar. We did have talking heads on the webinar, but we did not have our PowerPoint for Paul. And that was unfortunate because he had some good slides in there to share with everyone.
Well, the good news with, almost 600 people in attendance, the good news, the really good news is that Melissa was healthy and safe.
Yes.
Her family was safe. Her house was dramatically damaged, as well as her neighborhood. And there's a lot of emotion, obviously, as she's going through the understanding that a tornado is coming and then a tornado is impacting her house, and she kind of needs to bail, and go to the basement or whatever. So Paul, on with all of this crazy stuff going on and not knowing whether Melissa is safe or not, and what's going on with her family and her house and her neighborhood and stuff. But then you've got 15 minutes of content that you still need to present without a PowerPoint. So walking that tightrope, I know we've been friends for a long time, and I know you can filibuster with stuff, but it must have still been really a unique situation.
Well, Mark, we have been doing these webinars during the COVID pandemic, and we were forewarned. Melissa said to us, there's a possibility there's a storm coming through, and she anticipated that there would be a power outage of some sort. She would be knocked out. I don't think she anticipated anywhere near what happened, nor did the other participants. So Jeff Carlisle, so Melissa gave her introductory kind of comments and talked very briefly about MSAs. Jeff Carlisle did a very nice program on pharmaceuticals. Then Alisa did her piece. And so I was just about to go on when Melissa said, "Oh my God, we got a warning here. There's a tornado." And then she got really dramatic, and it was pretty clear the tornado was right there, sort of knocking at her front door. So she said, "I'm leaving," and so she left. And then the screen got mixed up. And then Alisa was gone. As she said, we didn't know whether it was a bad connection, but Jeff and I are there in our Hollywood Square boxes. And Jeff is sort of looking and I'm looking, and I said, well, there's people here who are getting continuing education credits for this. I think we had 500, almost 600 people participating. And I said, I do not have slides. I apologize for that, but I can cover the content that we think we need to cover. And fortunately, Melissa at the beginning had talked about what I think is really a fundamental about Medicare set-aside accounts, and that is Medicare is a secondary payer. So that gave me an opportunity to refresh their recollection about what she said, and then go into the material that I had without any slides. And those of us who do this for a living have a good sense of what is important to communicate to our audience. And so that's what I did. But while doing that, we can sense that there's other stuff going on. And Alisa comes back, and then I don't know if you remember, Alisa, but you were gone again, and then you came back again.
I kept getting kicked off. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So we didn't know quite how that was going to work. But ultimately, after speaking for a while, I looked down at the time and thought, oh my God. So Alisa was back. Jeff was still there. And the time was just about out. And I said to the folks who were there, we apologize for this. I'm not sure what you were able to see. I'm not sure how this came across, but I think we put on the program that we anticipated we were going to put on. Would you agree with that, Alisa?
I would. You did a really nice job, Paul, talking everybody through the last portion of it. And I'm so grateful that, Melissa's okay and her family's okay. And,
Yes.
there was quite a bit of devastation around the area that she lived in, and the pictures were almost breathtaking. So we're so grateful that she's well and her children are well and her new puppy as well.
The four of us exchanged emails after, essentially saying to her, what's going on, what happened. She told us about the damage to her house, but as Lisa just said, it was dramatic to see the pictures of her neighborhood. I mean, there was major devastation.
Yeah, it was overwhelming. I'm surprised after looking at the pictures that that her house didn't look similar to that, so because it really was pretty bad. There were things that were leveled out. There were farms around the area, that trees down everywhere, lots of things that were leveled out. So it was pretty overwhelming to see and to know that we were kind of walking through that with her at the time, and it was very emotional for her.
Yeah. The nice thing, Mark, is that we were dealing with four professionals, people who knew that we had committed to do something and really felt the obligation to do it and make sure that those who were in attendance, who were trying to get their continuing education credits, were going to be able to do that. Again, I would love to see, I understand the session was recorded. It would be interesting to see exactly the look on our faces when stuff hit the fan, so to speak.
It's kind of like going back and watching or listening to a 911 call, so to speak, right? I mean, and actually I was in a circumstance where I had to call 911 once, and it was an emergency. Somebody had a heart attack and passed away, and I had to give them mouth to mouth and resuscitate them. And it was kind of, I liken it to that because I'm actually afraid to watch it because I was overwhelmed. I know she was overwhelmed, and we were all worried about her. And then we were trying to get the listeners through the rest of the training so that they could get their CE. And that's a lot of people on the line. And everybody was so wonderful afterwards. There were people texting me. There were people sending emails asking to make sure that Melissa was okay. And I was so grateful that so many people were so caring about the situation.
Yeah. And the nice thing too, Mark, is that the folks at Carr Allison, that's Melissa's firm, really did sort of set us up nicely. So if there was sort of this catastrophic, unintended, unexpected catastrophic event, we knew where we were headed. We knew what the plan was going to be, and we were able to pull that off.
Yeah, it's when you're in the midst of a chaos, certainly like that, but you still have a job to do. Sometimes that's difficult to kind of maintain that balance. And I guess, you know, there's a variety of ways that you can do that. Essential workers, law enforcement, you know, clinicians and hospital workers, you know, a variety of people that, you know, you got a job to do, and there's a lot of stuff going on in and around you that you just kind of have to center and focus on it. And then you come back to, you know, maybe the emotional stuff afterwards, but you just got to kind of, you know, stick through it. You know, we certainly have learned over the past year how feeble and how frail and how fragile life is, and how fragile the status quo is, and how, you know, we just kind of expect things to happen. And I'm sure as you got into this webinar, it's like, okay, 60 minutes, you know, before 60 minutes, we know the parts, and then all of a sudden, you know, it just went crazy. Final thoughts, Alisa, from your perspective on what you maybe pulled from this as a lesson, either personal, professional, webinars, just, you know, what kind of lessons, maybe the, you know, like you said, the concern that came from the industry, from Melissa and her circle, what did you kind of learn from this that I think maybe will help going forward?
Well, you know, the one takeaway for me is always be prepared for the unexpected, right? So always have your notes pulled up on the side on another screen. Always make sure that you're prepared for the unexpected to happen. I know at Arcadia, we actually have a webinar team, and one of the things we do is we have a couple people in the background who are not on camera, who can take over, right? So that, you know, that's a great idea as you're working through the webinar process, is to maybe have some, you know, some backup people who can take over if something were to happen and you're in an emergency situation. And then also just being able to, if you have to talk off the cuff, like Paul, we could see your talking head in the square, so to speak, the Hollywood squares, right? Or the Brady Bunch squares. And that was great to still be able to actually see you, even though we couldn't see the PowerPoint, right? To be able to, you know, have that face-to-face interaction where you're at least talking them through that piece. So be prepared for the unexpected. That's my takeaway.
That's a takeaway for all of us for the past year, but this was further cemented in your mind on March 25th. Paul, what's your takeaway?
I have to tell you, Mark, that having been in this industry for years and having done presentations all over the place, that guys like you, guys like Bob Wilson, always have interesting war stories, have interesting stories to tell. Go ahead and try to beat this one.
You beat us on this one.
Unintentionally, we did. We got one that will probably top all the stories of this pandemic season and what things that have happened in webinars. And this is, I've told a couple of people this story over the weekend, and they said, really? A tornado came through? I said, yes, it did, but we weathered on. It was okay. So I agree with Alisa, though. Her points were well made. We were prepared. You know, we're people who have done this before. Rattled, yes, but still capable of going forward.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for sharing this very interesting story. And Paul, you definitely get the award. It's a webinar. You know, our thoughts and prayers certainly are for Melissa and her family and the community around her that was destroyed. I live in the Atlanta area, which is just north of Noonan, which had significant damage from that same storm. So, you know, and Nashville has had significant, you know, flooding. It's going to be an interesting spring for sure. So I think, you know, for anybody who's going to do a webinar, definitely have backups and definitely have a plan B, because chances are good you might need it. So Alisa, Paul, thank you so much for sharing the story.
Alisa, good seeing you. Mark, thank you very much.
Good seeing everybody. Thank you.
All right, take care.